Hello, UFC fans, and as the calendar will soon flip from June to July, welcome to a UFC 276 episode on the Big D podcast. Before bringing today's special guest, please subscribe, like, and share the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page. We can see all the content. Got some best ball and NFC South videos coming out later this week. Also, check out the Big D podcast on Spotify and Apple. So back as he was for the last couple of UFC pay-per-view episodes. It's Fantasy Labs, Action Network, Exterminator, Buccaneer, my friend Billy Ward. Billy, what's bugging you today?
Yeah, nothing today, fortunately. I get to stay in the nice, cool basement and talk fights, which is a lot better than being out in the heat working.
Oh yeah, let me tell you, being an AC guy in 95-degree weather would be fun.
But no, very exciting card we got coming up, 2 title fights. You know, as we were talking about before the show, we got a pretty wide line in the main event, but reasonably close co-main event. And then only 12 fights, which isn't my favorite from a DFS standpoint, but we'll get into that in a second.
Yeah, so how about the main event at 185 pounds? Let me see if I can pronounce these guys. Israel
Adesanya
against Jared Cannonier. And for the middleweight bout on Saturday night. The first thing I noticed for this fight is, wow, how about a minus 380 for favorite? I mean, Adesanya 22-1. His only loss was a UFC title fight at 205 last year. So obviously we know what he can do. What do you think about the middleweight champion on Saturday night? You think he's warranted of a minus 280 line?
I honestly think this line's too wide. I put it down earlier in the week. He was minus 365, and it's even creeped a little bit now. We're seeing minus 380, minus 400. But I like Cannonier's chances at the odds we're getting him. And I know it's more of a gut feeling than anything else. And I said the same thing with Talia Santos against Shevchenko. But we see these dominant champions that they kind of start looking past people. They kind of start getting a little bit too comfortable. And I think we're at that point with Israel Adesanya. You know, he's already talking a lot about potentially fighting Alex Pereira, who's fighting on the same card, you know, in his next fight. And that's a guy who's beat him in kickboxing and his whole thing. So I think he's looking a little bit past Cannonier. And we haven't seen Cannonier as much of a wrestler in his career. He got a takedown against Brunson, which kind of surprised everyone. But I think if he executes a similar game plan to what Jan Błachowicz did against Adesanya, he's got a shot. And Cannonier, for those who don't know, he's fought all the way up at heavyweight. He is a big, big middleweight. And Adesanya is not even a particularly big middleweight himself. So for a guy who's came down a couple weight classes, we saw him just get manhandled and pushed around by Blachowicz. I think if Cannonier is smart, he's going to do the same thing. Try to keep him against the fence, drag him down, smother him a little bit. And I think he's got a shot. You know, he's got long arms. He hits hard. He can land on the brakes a little bit. Adesanya is going to want to dance around and kickbox. But if Cannonier can get a hold of him and drag him down, it's going to be a tough fight for him. So this is one where I wish we had like a point spread system to bet on MMA where I could just bet on it being closer than the line said. We don't. So I'm going to be betting a little bit on Cannonier and also going to have a lot of him in DFS.
Yeah, to me, thinking about Cannonier's last fight was for what he did against Brunson and the fact he's fought bigger guys. I mean, could Blachowicz's fight be what Cannonier looks at? Because obviously I was at 205, and even then the champ was probably a light 205 because he's not even a particularly big middleweight compared to the veteran, compared to his opponent on Saturday night.
Yeah, and if you check in the weigh-ins, he weighed in at 200.5 when he fought at 205, which to me, you know, as a guy who's done some weight cuts and been some different weight classes, that strikes me as that's just what he weighs on any given day. It's about 200 pounds. You know, he might have bulked up a little bit for that fight. So if anything, he's probably going to be under 200 when he gets in the cage. Where Cannonier, if I had to guess, I'd say he's probably pushing 210 come cage time, which isn't, you know, huge. He's not as big as Blachowicz was by any stretch, but he should be able to play a little bit of bully fighting here and just be in his face and make it tough. And, you know, from a DFS standpoint, you talked about the lines being long. He's also the most expensive fighter. And I can't really justify paying up for him. I think he's a pretty bad tournament play. His last 2 title fight wins, he got 75 and 85 points. That's not going to be enough at 9,400 in salary. Where a guy like Cannonier could lose the fight, pick up a few takedowns, get a lot of control time against the cage, and pay off at 6,800. So, we'll talk a little bit later about the overall cash game strategy, but from a tournament standpoint, I think Cannonier is a far better play and should also come in at slightly lower ownership because Adesanya is just so popular and has that name recognition where everyone wants to click him.
And I mean, you look at Adesanya, 22 fights, 15 of them have been knockouts, the other 7 by decision. So it's either he knocks you out or it goes to the judges' vote. And we've seen with a few judges' decisions, the UFC judges do not score the fight like we non-professional judges score.
And they don't score the fight like they used to. It used to be a takedown, you pretty much guaranteed to win the round as long as he didn't pop right back up, which was bad. And I'm glad they fixed that. The other thing that's changed a little bit is they're rewarding damage more than they're rewarding volume in terms of the striking. And that's definitely going to favor Cannonier. He hits harder. He looks like he's swinging big and heavy. And, this isn't a video game where the judges see how much of that life bar goes away. They're trying to visually assess damage. So a lot of times a guy like Adesanya who's so smooth and kind of relaxed, even if he's hurting you more than it looks like, the judges can't tell that. So I think there's a sneaky route here to Cannonier throwing what looks like bigger shots, even if they're partially deflected or slipped or whatever, then those getting rewarded more than Adesanya just staying at range and touch. I don't like to try to base bets or decisions based on what I think judges are going to do because you're going to come out behind if you play that game. But in this one, I could see that angle being in play.
Yeah, and you look at it, I feel like with main events lately, especially title fights, that there've been some weird ones. I can remember the Nunez fight, which she somehow lost as an insane favorite, and maybe and it seems like at 185 pounds there've been some weird ups. There've been some crazy upsets. I remember Chris Weidman ended Anderson Silva's long streak many years ago. So maybe there's a new era coming.
Yeah, I think it's kind of natural where they feel like they've cleaned out the division. Before this fight, Adesanya was having rematches against guys he's already beat. Has he gotten too comfortable? Is he looking past Cannonier to try to fight Alex Pereira and, revenge his kickboxing losses? I think those are reasonable questions. I've seen the line move a little bit. So if anyone's in a legal betting state, wait a little bit, wait till Friday or Saturday to put this bet in. But I think Cannonier's a real good play at his odds.
Well, in trilogies in any sport, bring excitement, bring a little bit of hatred, and often bring a lot of controversy. And in the co-main event, we've got all of that between Alex Volkanovski and Max Holloway. Be honest, when I look back at both fights, I think Volkanovski, the Aussie, won the first fight, but seeing the second fight last night, I think Holloway will be stewing that he lost the second fight, because to me, it looked like Holloway won the second fight by controlling the octagon, being more aggressive, and limiting what the former rugby player could do with his leg kicks. Because looking back at that first fight, Holloway's calves looked like he ran a marathon.
Yeah, this one's tough. I get that angle, and it was a razor close fight. It's just really hard when we've got a trilogy fight where one guy won both of the first 2. I don't really see an angle here for why we can say that Holloway is going to have improved more than Volkanovski. Volkanovski has looked great in both of his fights since then. And might be the best pound for pound fighter in the world. And Holloway's been impressive too, but this is a guy who's already had, some issues with concussions and head trauma. Holloway is younger, but he's had more fights in his life. He's been knocked out, I believe, once or twice, where Volkanovski hasn't. So it's really not, I don't really see the angle here for why. No, he's only ever been submitted. That's my fault. So neither of them have been knocked out, but he's taken a lot more damage. He's been in a lot more wars. I just don't really see an angle for why we think this one's going to go any different for Holloway. And to call back to our judging conversation, this is another one. Holloway lands a lot of shots, but none of them look as hard. Where Volkanovski throws hard, he's a lot physically stronger. He's 5 inches shorter at the same weight class, but he has a 2.5-inch reach advantage. So everything's pointing me towards Volkanovski here. I really like his price in DFS at 9,000. He puts up a ton of points. It wouldn't be a fight that surprises me if both these guys make it in the optimal from a DFS standpoint. But from a betting angle, I just don't see how this one goes any different than the last couple. So I'm all about Volkanovski and the champion to retain in this one.
Yeah, looking back on it, Volkanovski may be a 145-pound guy, but I don't think there's a pound-for-pound harder puncher. And with Max Holloway, the one thing that worries me about Max is seemingly all his fights go to decision, because like the last umpteen fights, it's been a decision. And yeah, the last 2 fights he put up, what was it, 360 points?
No, he went over 200 against Rodriguez, against Qatar with 445 significant strikes, which is just insane. But that's another reason where I think these guys could both end up being in the winning lineup, is they both have a ton of volume. Volkanovski has all the grappling upside here. He mixes those in a lot better than Holloway, and looked good in the second fight when he did start going to the grappling. I think, as well-rounded and as well-coached as he is, he's probably going to go to that wrestling early, where Holloway has to worry about being taken down, so he can't throw all of the shots he wants. Volkanovski can throw with reckless abandon because he's the only one going to bring it to the mat. But both these guys just have a ton of volume. So there is going to be a tremendous amount of points from a DFS standpoint. And for cash games in particular, you just play both of them. Don't think too hard about this one. I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, how about this line? -200 for a decision bout. I mean, to be honest, this seems like another 25-minute fight. I mean, they've already fought 50 minutes against each other. What's another 25 in the octagon?
Yeah, I actually, I haven't really looked at the props yet. I usually do that later in the week, but my gut says the opposite of that. If you can get plus 170 or whatever to end inside the distance, I don't hate that. Volkanovski, we saw him against Jung, where he kind of wears you down and finishes you late. That wouldn't shock me. It wouldn't shock me if he got it to the ground and finished him there too with some ground and pound, or just beat him up enough. I mean, obviously it's more likely than not to go to a decision, but if we're getting that kind of odds on it, I actually don't hate laying a little bit on this one to end early.
Volkanovski to win by knockout, TKO, DQ, submission plus 275, and Holloway is plus 500.
Yeah, I don't see Holloway finishing Volk, but I could see it the other way around. Just, he's got the grappling and the power advantage. If we look at their it's pretty close on knockdowns in their career, but Volkanovski definitely seems to swing bigger and harder. So yeah, I would probably just even bet the fight just to end that way, if anything, but that's probably about 170 or so.
Let me see.
They might not have it up yet. It's early in the week too.
Zach Method knockout plus 200.
No, I'm seeing ends inside the distance is plus 155. So that's not quite enough for me, but not financial advice. Check in with me later in the week, anyone, if you want to know how I'm actually playing that.
Yeah. I mean, be honest. I mean, it would be weird if Max Holloway lost 3 fights, but maybe the fact that, I mean, I don't think, even though Max Holloway is 30, he feels like an old 30 with all the fights, because he's been in the war since he was 21 years old, and eventually Father Time's always undefeated.
And he pretty much doesn't have those clean fights that we see from Volkanovski. Like, Volkanovski barely got touched by Jung, never looked to be in trouble, never looked hurt. Holloway is just in an all-out war seemingly every single fight he's in. And, more often than not, they go his way. But, man, you only get so many of those,
And then eventually it catches up with you.
Right.
So, what other fight are you looking at seeing on the card after the 2 title fights?
Yeah, super entertaining card. I'm really interested in Sean Strickland versus Alex Pereira. For those who don't know, Pereira was a super high-level kickboxer, beat Adesanya twice, once by decision and once by knockout in K1, and is now came over to the UFC. I believe this is his 3rd fight. And I think they've said that, 3rd fight in the UFC. He had a flying knee knockout in his debut in the 2nd round, and then a unanimous decision over Bruno Silva last time. But I think Dana White has already said that the winner of this one is next in line for a middleweight title fight. And I've referenced that a little bit with Adesanya looking past him. But man, this is a good fight. Strickland's been on a tear ever since he went up to middleweight. I'm really leaning towards Pereira pretty heavily on this one. I think he's just got all the stoppage upside, where Sean Strickland really tries to outpoint people. And I don't think you can outpoint a guy like Pereira for 15 minutes and keep your head on your shoulders. So someone's going to have to put this one away, I think, and it's way likelier to be Pereira. But we're all we're all rooting to see that trilogy with Adesanya one way or the other. So it's a really good one. I'm definitely betting Pereira. I really like him for DFS. I think whoever wins this one will probably be in the winning DFS lineup just because the salaries are close. And Strickland gets there with volume, where Pereira is likely to win by a knockout if he wins. Strickland throws more punches per round than Volkanovski, for example. Three weight classes bigger. That's pretty impressive. That usually leads to a lot of points. Where Pereira has just got such dangerous strikes, he's likely to get a knockout. So that's another big one. Great DFS fight. I'm definitely betting that one. I think most of us from a DFS standpoint are probably going to try to fit Sean O'Malley in our lineups. The other huge favorite on the card just kind of seems inevitable. He goes through Pedro Munoz. I don't know if you have any different thoughts on that one.
Nick, you're right. I agree. I think O'Malley is probably the chalk play, even maybe not quite what the title fights are, but I feel like for the non-title fights, O'Malley feels safe. But the fight that intrigues me is seeing two old stallions go at it. How about Jim Miller and Cowboy Cerrone? I mean, how many times have they been in MMA fights? I've lost count, like 102.
Yeah, I said they're both over 50 fights, but I don't know. Like, from a fan standpoint, I don't really care all that much. Neither of these guys ever going to fight for a title again. Doesn't really impact the rankings. From a betting and DFS side, Jim Miller's a little bit heavier favorite than I thought he would be at -210. So I could almost see the angle on Cerrone. I'm going to try to have a little bit of him in some tournament lineups. But yeah, this is the third attempt at fighting for Cerrone in like a month. Fortunately, this one's 170, so he doesn't have to go through a crazy weight cut again. But he's been knocked out. We've gone over it on past pay-per-views when he's supposed to fight. His recent track record is terrible. Miller's been mildly better, I guess, in recent memory. So I'm definitely on the Miller side of that, but not one that I'm super excited about, either from a gambling/DFS standpoint or from a fan standpoint.
I'm just saying it, seeing two old guys and maybe finally seeing Cowboy Cerrone fight somebody after his last couple fights against Joe. The last pay-per-view was supposed to fight Joe Lozano, and guess what? That didn't happen.
Yeah, got canceled twice. But yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of just Miller's actually won both of his last two fights, so I should have taken that back. But I don't want to see Cerrone get knocked out anymore. I don't really think we need that anymore. I actually like him at his odds against Miller more than I did against Joe Lozano, but I'm still, yeah. Another fight, one of the featured prelims is Ian Gary versus Gabe Green. Now that one should be a banger. I don't know if you know much about either of those guys.
Oh yeah. Undefeated Irishman, of course, with nicknamed the Future. I mean, 9-0, and I think that fight's got a lot of potential.
Yeah, and Gabe Green looked really good in his last fight against Johan Lionesi with the knockout. Gary, he won his last fight, but people were pretty disappointed. Like, it wasn't a ton of action. He didn't look dominant. So I think this will be another good fight where he only landed 74 significant strikes in 15 minutes, which isn't a ton. I think this is a really good spot for Gabe Green in DFS at only 7,400. I like Gary to win this fight, but I'm not playing him in my cash lineups or anything like that, just given the salary, and I think the odds are probably a little bit wider than it need to be.
So obviously it's Tuesday afternoon, but are you thinking about playing all four title fighters? You're thinking about playing three of them because the last time we saw a main UFC pay-per-view, we fleeted Oliveira, and that went well for us.
Yeah. Well, no, the last time was the light heavyweight and then the Shevchenko Santos, which I think that actually worked out fairly well. Glover scored a lot of points in the loss, but at least
to share. Thank you.
Yeah. Glover scored a lot of points in the loss, so I kind of wish I would have had him. But, from a general strategy point, it worked out pretty well. But man, this one's tough because I like the underdog in the main event. So I'm definitely going to play Cannonier. And you definitely have to play both featherweights in cash. Like there's just no way even the loser in this is going to have a good score. So that's 3. And then is it worth it to fade Adesanya? Do you think there's other guys up at that salary point that can outscore him? I think I'd rather have O'Malley than Adesanya for sure, even with the 5 rounds, just because Iz has put up some disappointing scores even in his wins. But, it's not that hard to get both of them in there. So the only one I could see leaving out is Adesanya, to put it that way. I'll probably have all 4 in my cash lineup, but if you really like Muniz and O'Malley and can't fit them otherwise, I actually don't think that's terrible. I think Cannonier, from a price considered standpoint, might have a better score even in a loss than Adesanya. But if you're willing to go out on a limb like me and think he wins, then it's a pretty clear path.
Who was the guy you were saying again? Who was the guy again? I don't know if I can.
Last time around?
No, the guy you just mentioned now, not the title fight, but the guy who could be.
Oh yeah. We didn't touch on Andre Muniz, who's taking on Uriah Hall. Muniz has looked awesome. He's about minus 240 or so opening line, pretty expensive. He's let's see where he's at. 4-0 in the UFC, 3 submission wins. Uriah Hall just lost to Sean Strickland. Uriah Hall's 37 years old. His win before that was just because Weidman broke his leg. His win before that was against a million-year-old Anderson Silva. He hasn't looked great, even though he's won a few fights in a row. I think Muniz is one of the top prospects, even though he's not super young. And, his grappling is just levels and levels ahead of Uriah Hall. So he's a real safe play, it feels like, from a cash standpoint. I usually don't like to go after submission guys, though, because if that submission comes in the 2nd or 3rd round, he might not have got that many points along the way. So that's, my real decision is, do you want both Muniz and Sean O'Malley, or are you comfortable with Adesanya and one of those two, likely Sugar Sean?
Yeah, it could be it. I mean, is $400 worth having maybe 2 more rounds?
It's not even, the salary, because Muniz to Adesanya is
$200, excuse me.
Yeah, it's 100 more than Sugar Sean, 200 more than Muniz. I'm definitely not playing Macy Barber at 9,100, but that's a different story. But it's not really even the salary. It's just, do you think these guys are going to outscore Adesanya? Because if they win, they've shown, Muniz has at least 90 points in 3 straight wins, where Sugar Sean has scored like 1 million when he beat up Chris Moutinho for 4 rounds. But he's got 116, 147, 101, so over 100 points in 3 straight wins. Adesanya's last win, 75. The one before that, 85. Knocks out Paulo Costa, still only 102. Beat Yoel Romero, scored only 49. So we've seen a lot of bad wins from Adesanya, where if you're equally confident in O'Malley or Muniz getting the win, their win probably comes with more scoring than even 5 rounds out of Adesanya. So like I said, if you really like Iz, find the salary. It's $200. Like, it's there. It's not that hard this week, especially if you're playing both Cannonier and Holloway. But I don't know that he's a better play, even with the extra rounds.
It just makes it intriguing, because it would be weird if you fade him, because you're taking a bit of a gamble. If Anderson wins, he doesn't put up a lot of points. But if you use him, then you're taking a gamble that Muniz and O'Malley won't score 8 million points.
Right. Well, and if you're going with the strategy that I'm currently suggesting, and I might not, for the record, I shouldn't say probably. There's a good chance I end up with all 4 title fighters. But if you're fading Adesanya, it's going to be real nervous watching that last fight, because you're going to be cashing going into that one. And if Adesanya knocks him out quick or has a dominant performance, you're just going to watch that currently winning go all the way down in a hurt. So it's scary, and nobody likes being in that position where you're just hoping nothing happens for a fight. But it might be the right play. And if you've already got 120 points each out of O'Malley and Muniz, you're probably fine with it.
Yeah, and then you're watching last week, and everybody's tied for 252nd place, and 250 people cash. I don't think I've ever seen where like everybody's got the same line.
I think we're going to see something similar this week, because if you go Adesanya, O'Malley, Holloway, Volk, and Cannonier, there's only 2 spots left, and I think there's only 1 spot left, I'm sorry, if you already have O'Malley. So I think not everyone, I think there's going to be a lot of people with those 5, and then either Alex Pereira, Brad Tavares, or Dricus Du Plessis, or maybe even some people on Strickland. With most of those people probably going to be on Pereira, would be my guess. So I think that's going to be a real popular build. We could run into that. If you don't want to chop and you want to either win or lose, fade Adesanya. That's probably the way to do it. It's going to be unique enough that you're not going to be duplicated with a lot of people.
Yeah, and interesting. Usually we talk about cash, but from a GPP build, to me, am I crazy? But for a GPP build, would I be crazy? But I think I would fade Adesanya and Holloway and play Volkanovski and Cannonier, thinking Cannonier could win. And if he got any win at 6,800, even if it's a 70-80 point win, that's all I need.
Yeah, I think Cannonier is pretty clearly the better GPP play in this one. You know, Holloway and Volk, there's angles on both. I wish the salaries were a little bit closer on them, but that might keep ownership a little bit more reasonable on Volkanovski. I could also see playing, you know, the same strategy we're talking for cash is not going to be very popular in GPPs with both Holloway and Volkanovski. And we've seen it a handful of times. I've been keeping track of it personally since last October, but there's been, I believe, 3 different fights or 3 different events where 2 fighters from the same fight were in the optimal lineup. And the odds of that are way higher with Holloway and Volkanovski than almost any other 2 fighters. And with only 12 fights on the card, doing that kind of sneaky, unique build is going to be more valuable than it would be on a 15 fight card like we had the last pay-per-view.
Particularly if you have somebody, if you use the challenger at 6,800, because you've got 2 guys at 16-2, and then somebody at 68, so you could still jam in O'Malley, you could still jam in Munoz if you want.
You could, and you can also then still leave some salary on the table, which is another way. When there's only 12 fights like this, I think one of the, you know, really anything under 12 or down, I'd say, leaving just a little bit of salary and not spending all the way, I think is one of the best things you can do, just because most people feel like they have to spend 50, 49.9, 49.8, where you're going to have some unique builds if you don't do that. You know, so if you have 8,500 left and then you spend 7,700 on Brian Barberina, how much of your competition is going to leave 800 on the table? Not too many. So over a long sample, you know, that's going to be, I think, the better play, unless, you know, Adesanya comes out and absolutely wrecks him, and then I'm just talking horribly here. So, which is absolutely possible, and that's what the odds makers think is going to happen. So that is what it is on that side.
Yeah, and then Adesanya puts up 45 points in a boring fight, and we're all watching boxing, which is not fun from the UFC point of view.
Yeah, and it just, I try to think of it from like kind of like a flow chart or if then, but there's multiple ways that fading Adesanya for cash or GPPs can work out. So even if he wins, if both Muniz and O'Malley outscore him, then he's probably not going to be in the optimal lineup. Even if he wins with, you know, 90 points, but those guys get 120, you'd rather have those guys at a cheaper price. If Adesanya wins with 45 points or even 75 points like he has, probably not going to be in the optimal lineup. And then, of course, if Cannonier comes and beats him, there's almost no way at 9,400 that he can make the optimal lineup without also getting a win bonus, unless it's just a real weird night of boring cards, or boring fights. So there's just more ways for that to go wrong.
Or both guys put up 1 million points like the last title fight did.
I just don't see that with these guys. You know, neither of them, both are good strikers, but both of them throw less strikes than the average UFC fighter per round. So they're not coming out here throwing wild, throwing a ton of volume. Adesanya is very patient. He sits back and waits. Cannonier's not going to run forward throwing bombs because he knows he'll get caught. So I could see either one of them putting up a good score, but the odds of both of them doing it in this one are extremely low. Like, we're not going to see Glover versus Yuri, where we have this crazy wild samurai who lives in the forest throwing strikes and flipping around. Like, that's not going to be this fight. This is going to be a lot more calculated. I think it really comes down to whether Cannonier wants to and is able to wrestle. But even that's not going to put up a ton of points because he's going to work for the takedown for a minute or two, maybe get 1 per round. It's not going to be like we saw Gamrot versus Saryakin, where they're doing these crazy wild scrambles. It's not going to be that kind of wrestling in this one either.
Yeah, and then everybody's going to be befuddled thinking, why did I spend $80 on this pay-per-view?
Well, you're spending the money because you get Volkanovski versus Holloway right before it. You get Alex Pereira versus Sean Strickland before that, which is going to be a banger. We got Sugar Sean coming on. We've got Brian Barberina fighting yet another ancient fighter for some reason, which we haven't even talked about. I think Barberena is a slight underdog. Fantastic bet, fantastic play. Robbie Lawler hasn't won a fight against anyone other than Nick Diaz in like 6 years or something. Nick Diaz didn't even want to be there. And Brian Barberena makes a living out of beating up old guys. He just beat Matt Brown. I think Barberena is a fantastic play. Maybe not for cash because he's not that cheap, but he's another one. From a betting standpoint, love this fight. From an entertainment standpoint, I don't know, man. Do we really need to see Robbie Lawler in there here in 2022? Probably not, but the UFC loves giving us these old guys.
I mean, you've got Cowboy Cerrone and Jim Miller. Just put Robbie Lawler in there.
I know, but can you imagine how excited we would have been about this in like 2011? Would have been awesome. But Brian Barberena probably would have been in high school or something. I don't know how old he is, but no, he's 33.
It might have been in middle school for all we know.
I'm exaggerating. Brian Barberena is actually older than I am, but still, I have a hard time as a fan with these fights where like there's no rankings implication. No one's going to fight for a title. I don't know if something in Uriah Hall's the same thing. Like he went on a little run, but what are the odds we ever see Uriah Hall as fighting for a title, or do we really want to see him in there against Adesanya? Like it's not zero, but it's pretty damn close. And I don't know why we're still doing it. And I don't want to lump Hall in with the other guys we've mentioned because he's been solid lately. I think he's a very good test for Muniz, and if Muniz rolls through him the way we're expecting, then we have a legit contender on our hands. But yeah, and man, honestly, even Jessica I is not really in the prime of her career anymore. She's 35 years old, has lost 1, 2, 3 in a row. Why do we still need to do that? But that's just me. Some people love the nostalgia factor.
Yeah, so thanks for hopping on, Billy, and hopefully we bring home the cage this weekend.
Yeah, it's actually a really good night of fights. Wish we had a little bit more than 12 of them on there, just so we weren't trying to pull out all these stops to have a unique lineup, or maybe getting duplicated and winning less than we put in, like both you and I did last week. So
maybe
next time.
Yeah, blame Misha Tate for that.
Yeah, I wasn't going to play her anyway, but all right. Always good to talk to you, Dylan.